Okay, we are connected. Hi, everybody. This is Debbie Hockman from the David Posnack JCC. I'm the Cultural Arts Director here, and very happy to welcome you again for a book discussion with Lynda Levin. This is a program that we do in partnership with the Friends of the Sterling Road Library. And if you read the book or you didn't read the book, I think you're going to really enjoy the presentation either way. And I invite you to join us next month when we do this again, October 20th. Our book is going to be Olive Again, which is by Elizabeth Strout, and it's a continuation of her book, Of the Life of Olive Kittredge. So you can get that from your Broward County Library or any place that you buy books or read books or however, but whatever you do, read the book and come and join us again on October 20th. We also invite you to come to all the wonderful programs that we have at the David Posnack JCC, and please go to our website, dpjcc.org, to see all the upcoming authors we're having, including Fred Gutenberg tonight, Ken Follett tomorrow, Jody Picoult with Judy Bloom on September 23rd. And we have a whole month of Book Fest coming in October. So please go back often to our website. It gets updated all the time. And registration for the next book review is not online. We were having some issues, but it should be online by tomorrow. So you can sign up as soon as possible. And with all of that, I am going to turn it over to the lovely Lynda Levin, who will get us started today. Thank you, Lynda.
Debbie. So glad to see everybody. I love seeing everybody as you all come on. I just wish we could actually talk back and forth in the very beginning just to catch up. But I am so glad to see so many of you and so many new faces as well. I do want to remind you that what we try to do with this group is have discussion. I'm going to give you a bare bones kind of a summary of the book as we move forward. But we really want you guys to participate. And so, of course, because of our numbers, we can't participate vocally, but we're hoping you will use the chat button. Okay, so when we get to that part, please feel free to do it. Let me begin though by asking you, I hope, not if you did, I hope you all enjoyed the book. Did you all enjoy it? I did, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Oh, I see someone shaking their head no. So afterwards, my last question is going to be how you felt about the book. So I want to hear your participation on that. There is a lot to talk about. I want to first introduce you to the author. Her name is Louise Erdrich, and she is an American author, a member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians. She's written 22 books for adults. She's also written books for children, as well as poetry. Now, those of us who have participated in the Sterling Road Library read one of her other books and enjoyed it very much. It was called The Round House. And that book won the National Book Award in 2012. Before that, in 2008, she had written The Plague of Doves, which was shortlisted for the Pulitzer Prize in fiction. In 2015, she was the third person ever awarded the Library of Congress Prize for American Fiction. In 2016, she won the National Book Critics Circle Award for fiction for her novel, La Rose. In terms of her early life, she was born in 1954 in Little Falls, Minnesota. Her father was a German American, and her mother was part Ojibwe and served as tribal chairman of the Turtle Mountain Chippewa Nation. She has 6 siblings, and she always said that her father was really the one who inspired her writing because he used to give her a nickel for every short story that she completed. She was a member of she was a member of the very first coeducational class at Dartmouth in 1972. And it was there that she met Michael Doris, who was the director of the college's Native American Studies program. He taught her in class, and he was the one who inspired her to seriously begin investigating her own Native American legacy. After graduating Dartmouth with a degree in English, she went on to get a master's at Johns Hopkins, and she kept in touch with Doris, and they began collaborating on writing projects, eventually co-authoring a prize-winning short story, which Erdrich later expanded into a longer work. She published the resulting book, Love, Medicine, in 1984. The book won the National Book Critics Circle Award and established her as a major writer and a leader in what is now known as the Native American Renaissance. She married Michael Doris in 1981. Now, he had adopted previously 3 Native American children before his marriage, and the couple had 3 biological children as well. Erdrich and Doris collaborated on several books during their time together. The problem was Michael Doris suffered from depression. The 3 adopted children all suffered from fetal alcohol syndrome and required a great deal of exhausting and constant attention. In 1991, one of their adopted sons, who had suffered from fetal alcohol syndrome, was hit by a car and died at the age of 23. And then, in 1995, another of their adopted sons sent the couple threatening letters demanding money. They feared violence from him, and the couple ended up having to take him to court. Erdrich separated from Doris in 1995, and she divorced him in 1996. He committed suicide in 1997, and it was shocking, although later it was revealed that an investigation into his physical and sexual abuse of his adopted children had been undertaken. Doris had commented to friends that he was innocent of the charges, but he worried that he would not be exonerated. After his suicide, the criminal investigation was closed. In 1999, Erdrich picked up the pieces of her life, and she relocated to Minneapolis with her youngest children, and she opened a bookstore entitled Birch Bark Books with her sister. And in an interview that I saw online, she says that after that difficult time, she wondered if she would ever be able to write again. But fortunately, she was able to write. She started writing poetry and children's books, and then she returned to writing adult books. And when she did that, she also returned to the setting and the themes that she so well depicted with her Native American roots. What makes The Night Watchman more than just an engrossing story is that it's based on the author's grandfather, Patrick Gourneau, who was in truth the chairman of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa during the 1950s. And it's actually the first time that she ever wrote so directly about someone in her family. The truth is, he was, as she writes about, the night watchman at the jewel bearing plant, and he also was the one who carried the fight against what is known as the Termination Bill from North Dakota all the way to Washington, D.C. In an interview I saw online, the author explains to us that in the 1950s, there was a post-war housing boom and the time was ripe for grabbing land, Indian land, and disregarding the rights that were guaranteed by any treaties. The termination bill that was coming before Congress was actually called the House Resolution Bill 108. And what it did was it abrogated all treaties made with the American Indian nations, and it called for the eventual termination of all tribes and the immediate termination of 5 tribes, including the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa, which her grandfather belonged to. The author tells her that her mother gave her the letters that were written by her grandfather because she was born in 1954, which was the year that her grandfather had led the fight against the termination bill. In doing her research, Erdrich realized that of all the initial tribes that were slated for termination, the Turtle Mountain delegation was the first to mount a fierce defense and to actually prevail. The author wants us to know that there are many similarities in the fictional main character, Thomas Wajak, to her actual grandfather. They are so similar. The kindness, the endless letter writing while working as the night watchman, the sense of humor, and the perseverant battle on behalf of the tribe, and the love for the grandmother. And by the way, the one character whose real name she does use in the story was Senator Arthur V. Watkins, who was indeed, as she depicts in the story, a pompous racist. The author explains in this book she wanted to encompass the large story about the fight against the termination bill, but she also wanted to include a lot of smaller stories that depict life on the reservation, the beauty of that life, and the hardships encountered. She wants to tell the story because so few people know anything about the termination bill, and even many Native Americans have forgotten all about it. And so she's written this book, The Night Watchman. And it includes, as the New York Times book review states, it has high drama, low comedy, ghost stories, mystical visions, family and tribal lore, lots of tribal history, all of that in addition to a surprising enthusiasm for boxing matches, political fervor, and a terrifying undercurrent of predators and violence against women. And all of that is indeed in our story. As the story begins, we meet Thomas Warshak. He is the night watchman, and he works at this jewel bearing plant, which is the only factory located near the Turtle Mountain Reservation in North Dakota. And it's at that factory that the Native American women, with their very nimble fingers, paste micro thin slices of ruby, sapphire, and garnet onto thin upright spindles in preparation for drilling. Jewel bearings were used by the Defense Department at that time, and also Bolivar watches. So it was a big deal to have a job at that factory, because this was an impoverished reservation. When a white teacher first visited one of the students' homes, one of the houses, he said, it looked like a rude shelter for animals, the stacked poles plastered with pale yellow mud. Thomas describes the situation by explaining, everyone in the tribe is poor, not enough jobs, not enough land, not enough farmable land. The better land has been sold off to whites, not enough deer or ducks for hunting, and we can't even overfish without getting fined. Thomas is chairman of the Chippewa Council, who is now trying to understand the consequences of something called the Emancipation Bill, a new bill on its way to the floor of the United States Congress. The bill, Resolution 108, is being sponsored by the most powerful senator in Congress, Arthur Watkins. He claims this bill is going to uplift the Chippewa and it's going to free them, emancipate them. He wants them to be able to stand on their own 2 feet, to be like all Americans. They will now be equal with whites as far as the government is concerned. Of course, the bill also includes the necessity for relocation. Thomas knows that Congress is just plain fed up about the Indians and they want to solve their Indian problem. How do they want to do it? They want to get rid of them. To Thomas, what this bill means is they are being emancipated, okay, but they're being emancipated from being Indians. It means that they are being emancipated not only from their land, but from the treaties that Thomas's father and grandfather had signed. It was the breaking of a promise. The understanding was that the country could use their land in exchange for the services, the schools, and the hospitals that the government would provide. But now the government wanted to take those things away, as well as their land, insisting, yes, insisting that the Indians relocate. Thomas's father, Baboon, had shared the history of how for years their land was taken from them piece by piece, and finally how the scrap they were left with was almost taken from them years ago. He explained how in his day, they formed a delegation, they had a petition, and they hung on by their fingernails, their toenails, and their teeth. And they saved their scrap of land. And now, in 1953, he can't believe that the tribe and his son as chairman is once again faced with termination. Thomas has his suspicions about Arthur V. Watkins, the strongest backer of the bill. There had to be something personal in his fervor about their termination. And sure enough, it turns out that Watkins was a Mormon and had grown up on land stolen from other tribes by his father. His father had written to Joseph F. Smith, the founder of the Mormon faith, and he told Joseph F. Smith that he had found land for the Mormons. It was on land that came, of course, from the reservation of 3 different tribes. During that allotment, the Indians were relieved of 13.8 million miles of land that had been guaranteed to them by Abraham Lincoln. It was said at the time that the Mormons wanted land and they were going to murder all of the Indians who got in their way, in their path. Well, they didn't succeed. But it sounded now to Thomas like Watkins wanted to use the power of his office to finish what the Mormon prophet had started. Watkins was determined to terminate them and get their land. Thomas says, the tribe had survived smallpox, the Winchester repeating rifle, the Hotchkiss gun, and tuberculosis, and they weren't going to be destroyed by a bunch of tedious words. And so the scene is set. The Turtle Mountain tribe against the US Congress. That is the larger story that the author tells us. But what really holds the reader's attention are the smaller stories. Pixie Parenteau, another central character, insists on being called Patrice. She has been the homecoming queen, the class valedictorian, and unlike most girls on the reservation, she has no desire to tie herself down with a husband and kids. She is proud she's got this job at the jewel-bearing plant. It's a job that barely pays enough for her to support her mother and her younger brother, Pokey. Patrice's shameful alcoholic father returns home sporadically, and he terrorizes his wife and his children, and he bullies them for money. Patrice has been saving what she can because she wants to follow and hopefully find her older sister, Vera. Vera has seemingly disappeared in the city of Minneapolis. She has not been heard from in months. She never showed up again at the placement and relocation office where she was supposed to go in the city, and she's rumored to have had a baby. Patrice finally saves up enough money and she makes a fateful trip into the city. She doesn't find her sister. She does find her sister's baby, but it is a trip that introduces her to the frightening forms of exploitation and violence that endangers her life. Her life is saved by Wood Mountain, a young man, he's named for where his father had been born, a young Chippewa boxer who follows her into the city, and he rescues her from the scum she encounters. In the course of the story, we see Wood Mountain as he's being trained by Lloyd Barnes, the white math teacher and boxing coach. And we are rooting for Wood Mountain when he boxes Joe Wobble to make money for the tribe's trip to Washington, and later when he pursues a relationship with Patrice. We meet Juggy Blue, Wood Mountain's mother, who cooks for anyone in need with delicious food. We meet Patrice's best friend, Valentine, and we actually start to feel sorry for Lloyd Barnes, that boxing coach, who is hopelessly in love with Patrice and is obsessed with mathematics. We meet Doris, the white girl who drives Patrice and Valentine to school every morning, the same girl whose parents had bought the Indian land from the bank in 1910, when Indian land was sold cheap out of someone else's desperation. We meet Millie Cloud, the half-white daughter of a man in the tribe who lived with her mother off the reservation and who has gone off to college, managed to get to college. And while visiting her father on the reservation, Millie took a survey of the tribe, and her study resulted in her master's thesis and a master's degree. Armed with that study and her credentials, she now joins in the fight against termination. And by the way, she turns out to have a lot of peculiarities very similar to Lloyd Barnes, the boxing coach. She too is obsessed with geometric patterns and shapes. And she's delighted at the end of the story when the math teacher slash boxing coach, Lloyd Barnes, asks her out for a date using an equation. So the two of them, with their peculiarities, they are made for each other. And we see that the cast of tribal characters in the story is colorful. Each does their part in fighting the termination bill, with Juggy Blue painstakingly typing out the petition. And Louis Pipestone, who lost his son in World War II, he's getting everybody to sign it. He tends that petition like a garden. And then there's another step. 45 members of the tribe take a difficult trip. They go to Fargo for the first time to state their testimony. Picture that they were people who drew their water from tiny springs. They lighted their homes with kerosene. They were dressed in worn but immaculate clothing. And as Indians had for generations, they were attempting to understand a white man reading endlessly from a sheath of papers. Meanwhile, we see Thomas. He's continuing to set up meetings with congressmen, local leaders, the superintendent of schools. He's going to convince them all how expensive it would be if the federal government gives up their hospitals and schools. It would force the local governments to pay for everything. And finally, a small group of them, nervous as they are off to Washington. Literally, they are going to fight City Hall. In this case, the US Congress, and winning. The termination bill is terminated. A happy ending. And as long as we're talking about happy endings, How happy are we as readers when Vera survives the horrors of the city and is able to return to the reservation and her baby? How happy is Patrice when she sees her sister bonding with Wood Mountain, beginning to heal her demolished heart? And as for Patrice, a girl who has early on set her sights high, we know that she's going to follow in Millie's footsteps. She's going to be off to college. And we see at the end of the story that everyone is headed in the right direction. So now, it's your turn. I've given you the bones of the story. I want to begin by asking you a question. I happen to have really enjoyed this book, and I really have enjoyed Erdrich's writings. I'm wondering what you think about her style of writing. Talk to me a little bit about the poignancy of her writing. What did you think about her writing? Were there any special parts that moved you? What beautiful writing moved you?
Just remember at this point, we're asking you to go ahead and put your comments in the chat option. Don't unmute yourself, just write it in the chat option. It takes a couple seconds for it to come up and we will read what you're saying to Lynda. So just go ahead and put those.
There's always a little pause here when we do this. But I want to give you a chance to.
Got already. We got from Donna Weber. She said, poetic, beautiful flow.
Yes, thank you. I agree. That's what I thought too. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? Any special scenes that you thought about that were so poignant to you in any way? I'll start us off by saying about her language. I love this one. This is the author is telling about how Thomas, he's exhausted. He comes back. He's been the night watchman. He's done his rounds. He comes back. He gets into his house and he wants to just get into his bed, and he does. And he pulls over himself a quilt. And listen to how she writes this. It was a quilt of patches left over from the woolen coat that had been passed through the family. Here was his mother's navy blue. It had been made from a trade wool blanket years ago, and now to a blanket it had returned. Here were the boys' padded plaid wool jackets, ripped and torn, and here was Rose's coat from the early days of their marriage, blue-gray and thin now, but still bearing the fateful shape of her as she walked away from him, and then stopped, and turned, and smiled, looking at him from under the brim of a midnight blue hat, daring him to love her. They'd been so young, 16, now married 33 years. I loved how so much is packed in that paragraph. We see their financial straits, the patched quilt, but we also see how he is recalling all of those memories with such fondness, each piece of clothing, and clearly his love for his wife. Any thoughts that you have?
Donna had also written about the spirits that appear like his dead childhood friend.
Yes, there's so much in that, and we can talk about that really in a little bit. We're going to talk about that at length because you're right, the spiritual world plays a huge part in this, in her writing. Any other thoughts? Anybody have any thoughts about, yeah.
A couple others just came in. Ruthie Reines just wrote, descriptive, colorful writing was great. I found difficulty keeping track of the characters, which
yeah, it takes a little bit from the very beginning to hear their voices, right? As Debbie pointed out earlier, it's a little bit harder to track them. Yeah, keep track. So I was very moved by the story of Vera. For those of you that, just to refresh your memory, or if you haven't read the book, in their youth, both Vera and Patrice were known for their good looks. And Patrice says that Vera, her sister, always had this elegance about her, that she dressed distinctively, that she didn't want to leave home, but she met somebody and she fell in love, that a person that her mother, Jeanette, did not approve of. It was all too sudden, but she ends up leaving. And when she goes to say goodbye to her mother, Jeanette goes ahead and turns away. The mother turns away. And of course, she's haunted by that fact through the years, through the months when she doesn't hear from her daughter. And of course, we learn the horror that had befallen her. We learned that Vera was imprisoned inside the hold of a ship, inside the hold of a freighter went on the Great Lakes. and she was used and abused by all of the men on that ship. And through this one character, the author is able to convey to us the horrific problem of prostitution and the trafficking of Native American women in Minnesota. But what was amazing to me about her style, it was the poignancy of that chapter about Vera. Does anybody remember that chapter? It was only 9 sentences. But in those sentences, it speaks of the pain, the horror, and the depravity that she is forced to experience. And of course, there is foreshadowing in terms of this spiritual world, as someone just alluded to. There is foreshadowing to her plight early on in the book, but so much is conveyed in those 9 sentences. And of course, even the title of that chapter, that very brief little chapter, the title, Agony would be her name. Any other thoughts about the writing? What about comedy? Did you guys see any comedy in the story? Well, I'll start us off. How about the fact that there are 2 missionaries, the Mormons, Elder Vernon and Elder Elnat? They're very funny in the way that they try to missionize and convert all of the Indians. And in a way, I think the author is kind of getting back at the Mormons as she makes them such comedic characters in here. Any thoughts about that? Any remembrances that you have about that, about the comedy there?
Leslie had written, I'm not sure it was about comedy, but she wrote that she found the scene where Patrice dressed in the blue ox costume strange and amazing.
Yes, and it speaks volumes to who she was. It was strange and amusing and frightening because she actually had become the victim of a predator, right? Yeah, that was a very moving part. I see that too. Anybody else have any more comments about that, about the comedy? How about those scenes when Elder, yeah, go ahead. Debbie, did you have something?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay. Elder Vernon.
Oh, I was gonna.
Yeah.
Oh, it's Elena. All I want to say is I read this many years ago. I don't know when it was written, but I guess when it came out. I just remember being so overwhelmed at the beauty of her writing. I just was flabbergasted. I don't think I had ever read such beautiful writing. I don't remember all these details at all. I wish I could be
Well, that's the
participate, but it was gorgeous.
Fun part about coming to a book club. You get to have your memory refreshed, right?
Yeah, exactly. One more point about that it didn't really bother me, but apparently, and you mentioned that she and her husband Michael were corroborating together, and that kind of bothered me because how much was her and how much was him in the beauty that I was.
Yes.
And I don't know after they divorced and he committed suicide whether. She's written books since then. I didn't know if they were as dynamic as this.
Elaine, all of the books that she wrote for which she has won awards and everything, she is in fact, she did all of those on her own. He died very early on. The bulk of her career was after his death. Yeah, so this is her writing.
Oh, great. Okay, but I'm just saying,
Right.
I'm going to go back and read it again.
Okay, well, absolutely.
Thanks, I'm sorry.
Okay, anybody else have any comments about the comedy? Okay.
The other thing was Donna had written when the Mormon guy find the couple in the car. That was funny.
Okay, so thank you. That's exactly what I was just going to tell you guys, just to refresh your memory. So Elder Vernon is this very, he's a very passionate Mormon, and he comes and he sees Norbert and Betty. They're having sex in the car, and this is a young couple. She's friends with Patrice, and Betty and Norbert are having a very steamy time, and all of a sudden, Elder Vernon sees them, and he's upset with himself afterwards that he didn't disturb them, that he didn't stop them, that he didn't intervene to stop 2 souls from sinning. Now they were totally lost. Of course, what we know is he then gets a second opportunity because again, he finds them parked in the car and they're in the back seat and it's steamy again and it's a very inopportune moment. And all of a sudden, Norbert slides off of Betty and he slides out the door, falls onto the ground. And Betty thinks that the latch on the door had popped by itself. But then she heard a voice say, "Could I have a moment of your time to tell you about the Lord's plan for your soul?" And of course, who is it? It's Elder Vernon, who finally was going to try to save their souls. So the author, she interjects along with the poignancy of the rest of her story. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Kathy wrote, I love the emotional power of her writing and her vivid descriptions, each character and their motivations, setting, and nature. The scene with the ox costume was a bit of a stretch, but
Debbie,
sadly
we just
hilarious.
lost you.
And she said, I'm from Minnesota and could,
Debbie, okay.
and could relate.
Debbie, we lost you.
You can't hear me?
Debbie,
Yeah?
okay.
Can you hear
Debbie,
me
can
now?
you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you
Okay,
hear me?
we lost you.
Oh, okay.
I think you have to unmute yourself. Okay. You there?
Yes,
Okay.
can you hear me now?
I want to talk about, Debbie, I don't know, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear
Yes? Okay.
you. Yes.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about Thomas. I've given you a little bit about him. What else can you add? What struck you about Thomas as a character? The author talks about how Thomas was appropriately named. His last name was Washak, which in Chippewa means...
I didn't get that.
In Chippewa, it means...
Could you try again?
Is somebody on something going on with Zoom?
I don't know. Let me check. Hold on one
Yeah.
second.
Although the Wajak, the muskrats, his name means muskrat, they were numerous and ordinary, they were also crucial. In the beginning, after the Great Flood, as part of their creation story, it was a muskrat who ended up remaking the earth. And in this way, as it turned out, Thomas was perfectly named. So what is it in the story that makes you realize that actually Thomas was perfectly named? What is it about Thomas?
We had
Okay, here's what I found.
I don't know what that is if somebody's,
Is that someone's?
I don't know. But we had that Diane wrote that Thomas was very kind and patient. Kathy wrote that to what you asked about, what did you think about with him? And she said his compassion. Leslie wrote, Thomas is a very responsible person. He was proud of his job. Doubting Thomas. Donna Weber wrote perseverance. Barbara wrote Thomas was a leader, and Kathy also said his intelligence and drive.
Absolutely, all of those. And how appropriate that he was the night watchman, because he did his job, he did his rounds, he did everything with reliability. He was there to help everybody who needed help on the reservation. He was the driving force for all these improvements in the tribe. He built up relationships. He would write these letters, remember this part, late into the night, getting very little sleep. He would write official correspondence to senators to thank them for bringing electricity to rural North Dakota. And at the same time, he would request a meeting with them. And then he would write to a county commissioner to thank them for repairing a road. And at the same time, he would request a meeting. Because in the end, he was the driving force behind a lot of the improvements that went on for the tribe. And I love the idea that he went to the boarding school. And of course, through Thomas and through each of these characters, we learn so much about not only the reservation, but about history. And at one time, it was mandatory that all of the Indians had to go to boarding school. And there they learned how to read and write, and really to be white. And so Thomas learned well. He always looked respectable. His collar never flopped. He always used starch. He believed in really looking well. He loved to physically handwrite. He loved the idea of making letters, R's and Q's, and he would often start his sentences with those letters. As the night watchman, he did more than just watch over the plant. He was actually watching over the tribe. Any other thoughts about Thomas?
Kathy said that she loved his connection to the spirits. And
Yeah.
Jackie said he kept watch when all else were unaware.
Absolutely. The other thing that Thomas was really a pivotal person, and he didn't even realize it at the time. Do you remember the story with Patrice and Bucky Lavelle? Bucky was a guy, a young boy who decided he was going to take Patrice in his car and he was going to invite his boyfriends along. And at one point she thinks he's taking her home. And of course what ends up happening is the guys all decide to attack her. And she's very clever. She says to them, you know what, guys, this isn't so great in the back seat. Why don't you take me to the lake? If we go to the lake, then, this will be a lot nicer for you. So the boys fall for it and they go to the lake, and she gets out of the car, and what does she do? She immediately runs into the lake and she swims far out. And who actually is in their boat at that time to rescue her? It's Thomas, Uncle Thomas. And he goes ahead and he takes her into the boat. And of course he has no idea what she's doing in the lake at that hour. Why is she there? Had he known, Thomas would have given those boys a good thrashing, each one of them. So even in that regard, he was a savior. Any other comments? Okay, how about the relationship between Thomas and Rose? It was so beautiful. Anything?
There were a couple of comments that came in, what
Yeah.
we were talking about. So Kathy said that the boarding schools were often abusive, and the fact that he thrived there was remarkable and probably a testament that his school was relatively okay.
Yeah.
And Bonnie said he's also one of the eldest members of the tribe who will carry on fighting for the rights of the much ignored Native Americans.
He really was a vessel, wasn't he? He was sort of a vehicle between generations. His father, Baboon, remembered really the starvation of the tribe. And of course, he is that link between the old and modernity. Any other questions or comments about that? Because I wanted to tell you about Thomas and Rose. I thought that the way that was really, it was just a beautiful relationship. And I love this one line. Thomas always checked the weather of Rose before he made a move. Today was blustery but cheerful, so he decided to come in the door. And I thought that was a great way of putting it. Everybody should check out each other's moods before you make a move. Anybody else have a comment that they want to make about her relationship, Thomas and Rose, that relationship? How about the scene when the other places were starting to get electricity? Rose asked for a plug-in ironing machine. They didn't have electricity yet. So getting the iron really didn't make sense. But Thomas still bought her the iron. She guarded that iron jealously. She shined it like a trophy. He was just so happy to give it to her. Anything else anyone wants to add before we move on to talk about Pixie?
I actually, though, I would have liked to know more about Rose. I think that was one thing that was lacking to me. Like, she was only because she was a big influence on him, and that was something that I thought was an interesting choice of the author.
Right. We really just get kind of an outline of Rose. There was one little line in there that was really nice. Do you remember the part where Thomas comes home after his night watch and he says to Rose, I saw Roderick tonight. And you remember who Roderick was? Roderick is one of the ghosts that he sees at night. And who was Roderick? Roderick was one of his friends from the boarding school. And Roderick had died years ago of tuberculosis while still a boy. So he tells Rose, Thomas says, I saw Roderick tonight. And then Rose is getting very concerned about him. So Rose insists on coming with him during his shift as the night watch. And he writes here, he says, he was moved that she'd come with him, Rose, with her household burdens, her make-do challenges, her care for their parents and the endless children of everyone who was in trouble. She took care of everyone around him, and now she was taking care of him, and she was wearing lipstick. She looked demurely down into her cup of coffee and then raised her eyes to his. He looked back at her, and everything else fell away. It was Rose, and always Rose. They held each other's eyes for so long, the tension made them laugh. And what I loved about that scene was you really did see that Rose was everything to everybody in the tribe. But also the affection that was packed into that scene, and also that sense of humor comes through as well. Talking about Pixie, who wants to be called Patrice. Why does she want to be Patrice? What does that say about her?
She wants to be grown up.
She wants to be grown up. She doesn't want to be cute. What else? She was above all kinds of petty incidences, like the one that happened with Bucky and his friends, giving her that ride to nowhere, telling people how she'd be willing to do anything, and when actually she never had. What about her? What else about her? She had big dreams, right? Did you sense that right away? She had dreams. She loved chopping wood. Why? What did she do while she was chopping wood?
Barbara said she wants to be Americanized.
She wants to be Americanized. She wants to be successful, and she wants to take the attributes of Americanization, yes, that will make her successful. Yeah. Anything else? Any other thoughts about her? She loved chopping wood because she was planning her future. She realized how precarious her situation was. She realized, in fact, there were times when she felt she was stretched across a frame, like a skin tent. She realized that she had this, how easily her father, who was alcoholic, could wreck the family. And she realized how little there was between her and her family and disaster. And she was the link. She was the one that had to protect them from whatever disaster might befall them. Anything else about Patrice? Yeah.
Kathy said, I think she wants to use her success to help her family and the tribe, and that chopping wood was meditative to her.
It was so meditative to her, and that's exactly what she wanted to do.
And Diane said that she's very strong physically and mentally and independent.
Yes, and that strength, that mental strength, is going to serve her well. What about Patrice when she gets to the city to find Vera? What about that scene? Somebody just brought that up about how she falls for a predator. She's very naive. Anything else you want to say about that?
Donna said that she didn't think she wants to be white Americanized. She thought she was truer to her Indian pedigree. And Diane Berman said that she is fearless.
Fearless, totally fearless. Fearless and naive could be a bad combination, right? And it almost was for her, because after she gets off her first train trip and gets to Minneapolis, of course, she falls into the hands of predators. And she ends up taking a job as a water jack. I've never even heard that word, right? She's asked to, or not even asked, but they tell her she has to dress in this costume of an ox, because this bar is sort of featuring Paul Bunyan's theme, and she has to perform in a tank. Of course, what she doesn't realize is the rubber costume that she's told to put on actually has some kind of a poison inside of it from the pesticide that they use to keep the rubber. And so she ends up putting this costume on, and she lasts for a few nights, and she's making money. She's so naive, she doesn't realize she's really being held prisoner. Anything else about her? What about this trip? What else does she realize on this trip? Well, she's perseverant. She is looking for Vera, and she doesn't realize the full horror of what she's finding. She doesn't realize what it really means when she gets into this dilapidated house where Vera was supposedly living. And she finds some diapers. She realizes Vera had been there with her baby, but she doesn't realize the full horror of it until she actually sees chains in the wall, and she sees dog collars attached to those chains and realizes that they were not made for dogs. Those collars were to hold humans. So this is a whole new, horrible, ugly world that she realizes. Anything else about Patrice?
We had a couple comments. She didn't just cave in. She did a lot of successful negotiating.
She did.
And she realizes she needs help from Wood Mountain. That was from Donna Weber. And Ruthie said that she is really naive.
She's very naive. And I'll tell you, the other thing is she is really lucky. That's the other adjective I would use, because she's lucky that Wood Mountain follows her into the city, and he's able to rescue her from the fate that befell Vera. The other strong woman's character that I wanted to bring up was Jeanette. She is a powerful presence. This is Patrice's mother. Anything that was unique about her? Anything you want to talk about with her? She was a powerful, powerful woman.
What about her hands? They kept talking about her hands.
Her hands were unique, and that was almost symbolic of her extraordinary powers. Her hands, one of her hands was missing a finger, and the other hand had an additional finger. Do you remember that in the story? So right away, in fact, one of the gifts that this author has, each of her characters has unique qualities, certain peculiarities that are attributed only to them. And in this case, she has her hands. But the other thing that's really interesting about Jeanette is she was hidden years ago. She was hidden. She was never taken to the boarding school. She was raised by her grandparents. And so she really learned the customs and the stories and the ceremonies of the tribe. And so it is that her real job in the community is to pass on what she knows. People came from all over to learn from her. And the author says, once that deep knowledge had been a part of a web of strategies that included plenty of animals to hunt, wild foods to gather, gardens of beans and squash, and land, lots of land to roam. Those were all the stories, those were all the things that she knew about. Now, of course, who's sort of taken over in terms of being the future? It would be Patrice, because we see Patrice, she knows Chippewa, she knows the native language, but she's also been able to learn English easily. She also knows her mother's teachings and her mother's songs, but she has also learned the poetry of Emily Dickinson. And so we see where she again is a bridge to modernity. Any other comments about her?
There's no comments yet about her, but Leslie had brought up to put onto the back burner here about Jack, because everybody seemed to know him when Patrice was in the big city.
Right.
And then there's a little bit of thing going on that there's not complete agreement that Patrice was naive, because she was astute enough to get pay in advance and insist on a lock on her door.
So she was a very good negotiator. That's right. She was very clever. She was naive in that she fell into the hands of the predators, but once she realized she was in trouble, yes, she used all her cleverness skills. One of the things I thought was interesting about the book is how it tells us about the culture of the Turtle Mountain community. What struck you about their culture? Anything that struck you about the way they live their lives? Well, what about the way they treated their elderly? Noko, who is Patrice's grandmother, suffers from dementia and is treated with such love and respect within the home. And how about Baboon, Thomas's father? Thomas tells us when he thought of his father, peace would steal across his chest and cover him with sunlight. Thomas says, you can never get enough of the ones you love. Here, I have Baboon with me for so many years, his great old age, he's 94 years old, but I am greedy. I want him longer.
And I think the fact that she's writing the book about her grandfather is, evidence that the elders are important. I mean, here's a whole book about him and how significant she sees him, and not just as an old man.
And the other thing that she does in the story, not only does she write about her grandfather, but she writes about their history, how much they honor their history, their stories of survival, their relocations from one piece of land to another. And she tells those stories, the author does. They all had such strong attachments to the land. At one point, Wood Mountain, he picks up some shells and he says, maybe a way back person touched these shells. We are so connected to those way back people in so many ways. He says, sometimes when I'm out and about, I feel like they're with me, those way back people. They're with us. I could never leave this land. So you see this strong connection to the land.
Diane said the elders are treated with respect. Christine said that they loved each other. And Jackie said it seems to be more in other cultures than our own to treat our elderly with respect.
By the way, I think that's part of what I thought about also when I read this as well. Yeah.
And I just want to thank you also. We're not finished yet, but this point of honoring the land, and you chose this book, and you chose it because of a it seems to me, a very important reason about what's happening right now, where we see the federal government trying to steal the land that was so important to these people. I mean,
Right.
at first I said,
We're going to have an opportunity at the end. We're going to have an opportunity to talk about that because there is something very contemporary that I want to bring to your attention at the end. But right now, let's talk a little bit more about the story, and then we'll get to that. How is that? Okay. I want to talk about the spirit world. That was so much a part of it. You know, the author says something in here that I thought was interesting. In one of the online interviews that I saw, you know, there's so much connection to the spirit world. We see these visitations that Thomas has at night from Archie, his old friend, who died also of tuberculosis years ago, and that ghost keeps coming to him in the jewel plant, and Roderick, who was his school friend, who also comes to him at night in these visits. And so these spirits are very alive and surround them. And so in one of the interviews, somebody asked, they said, well, what's the story, you know, what with this whole idea of being able to connect with these ghosts? And the author's reply was this. She says, there are times when people have access to both worlds, the real world and the other world. When there seems to be some kind of emotional barrier that's down and you see things, when coincidences aren't coincidences, when everything is charged with meaning and dreams are predictive and real and hard to distinguish from reality. And so you get this feeling that she definitely, and this was very much a part of their culture, this whole spiritual world was a very thin barrier between reality and the other world. Any scenes that you think of that were really very interesting to you in terms of the spiritual world and the connection that they had and the impact that the spirits made on the real world?
Before getting those answers, Michelle had written in that the book showed how important freedom to live the way they wanted was to the Indians, despite the fact that they were living in shabby dwellings, were poor in their community, and traditions were most important, always being.
Exactly, yeah.
Jackie wrote, to answer to your question, Thomas and the Night Visits, and Kathy said the dance in the sky was fascinating.
Beautifully written, wasn't it? The powwow in the sky that Thomas sees one night. He's locked out. He goes outside and he sees the stars, and the stars are just, it looks like they're dancing. And he feels like it is a powwow that he's getting to see, this radiance around him. Anything else? Anything else? How about the idea that these dreams were predictive? How about the idea that Patrice is having these dreams about Vera? And she finally tells her mother, and her mother says, oh, I've had the same dreams. And what does the mother deduce from that? She says, you know what? Vera is reaching out to us. And so they have these predictive dreams throughout the story. Any other things that?
Barbara had written that when Thomas went outside at work and he saw the bird and it made everybody nervous, it was true, that one scene.
Right. It was an owl. And it was funny because the owl to him was very wonderful. He was so excited to see the owl. He thought that was going to foretell good tidings. And in fact, his friend Labat said to him, are you kidding? It means death. So, you know, even the spirits can sometimes be misread. Anything else?
Not yet.
Nope. Okay, good. So, the spirit world was definitely, I thought one of the greatest scenes at the end about the spirit world was when Millie Cloud, remember she's the one who has her degree, she wrote this study about the tribe, and she comes and she's very successful in presenting in Washington, and they use her to further their case against the Congress. But I love the part about she's now making copies at the end. She's making copies of the chairman's report for the tribe, and she's running the duplicating machine. You remember those days, the mimeographing machine? And she feels a little tipsy from the smell of the duplicating fluid. But all of a sudden she sees that this time as she's working the machine, with each duplicate, a spirit came off the press. In 1892, these people had signed the first Turtle Mountain census. And all of a sudden there's this stream of Indian names that are coming off of the press. And it's actually their spirits. For some reason, tonight, they travel down Star Road to wander around their old homeland before flooding back to their other existence. They kept flying off the duplicating machine. They were the original people who came down from Canada, French Cree Chippewas who swirled across the earth, first hunting buffalo. Juggy says, she tries to explain to Millie. She says, oh, you don't understand. Yeah, they are spirits, and they're looking after us, all those dancing spirits. Anything else about that scene, about that world, that spiritual world?
No other comments.
Anything else about the idea of when Thomas ends up talking to Archie? What does he gain from those conversations with Archie and Roderick? Can you remember anything about the content of that? He's talking to Archie, and Archie gives him a lot of moral support. He says to Archie, listen, Archie, you know, you and I had a lot of bad times and hard times when we were young, but I'll tell you, I'm going to go off to Washington, and I'm telling you, things are bad. And Archie gives him moral support during those nighttime visitations. And in the same way, Roderick comes to visit him. And what does Roderick tell him? Roderick says, listen, I'm here because of our friend Labatt. Now, Labatt was another guy from the tribe who also worked at the jewel bearing plant. And Roderick tells Thomas that Labatt is stealing. He's stealing some small things in preparation for stealing some of the jewels at the plant. And Thomas realizes that a product of his imagination has just told him something that he has sensed was true. And he confronts Labatt, and Labatt admits, yes, he has been stealing. He's been so desperate for money that he's been stealing. And so we see where Roderick actually, you know, just confirmed something that he had actually been feeling himself, Thomas. In much the same way, it's Roderick who goes ahead and gives him support when they're in Washington, D.C., and they're fighting Congress. And all of a sudden, you know, Thomas is feeling so uncomfortable, and he's thinking maybe they're losing, and Roderick shows up in Washington and cheers him on. He says, listen, don't get upset. Don't get mad about anything. Do what you did so well when we were in that boarding school. Butter him up. And sure enough, he takes that advice, and Thomas goes down and he sees Arthur Watkins after the testimony. And he says, I want to thank you for your kindness in listening so carefully to our testimony. And I can tell you're such a caring person. You know, he's obviously lying through his teeth, but he's buttering him up. And sure enough, Watkins says to him, wow, thank you. No one has ever thanked me before. Thomas realizes how desperate he is, that he's willing to forego his dignity in order to butter him up if it will help their cause. Any other thoughts on that with the spirit world?
Kathy had written that they bring him comfort.
They do, comfort and support. They are old friends, and he keeps talking to them on the other side. I love the way he says when he talks to them, he feels like maybe they're just across the river. Maybe they're, you know, they're not that far away. Maybe they're just in another country, and he can talk to them. Any other thoughts on that?
Well, I did think it was interesting when at the end Roderick stayed in DC with the other spirits, like that they kept him back. That was like that he found a different place to be. I thought that was like that she gave the spirit his own life in a way. It wasn't just, you always wondered, was it in his mind or was it really a spirit? And then she kind of made the spirit a life.
Spirit, yeah. I love the part at the end, by the way, when Roderick does go to Washington and he does see all these other spirits because he finds the bones and the feathers that people have filed away, you know, to keep as in their files about the Indians. And of course, those are spirits. They're all spirits that are all there, and he's able to connect with them. Yeah. Okay, what about the view that Indians had of whites and whites had of Indians? Anything you want to say about that? Thomas knows, to most of their neighbors, the Indians were people who suffered and hid away in shabby dwellings or roamed the streets in flagrant drunkenness and shame. Everyone knew that about the Indians, except a few people did know some good ones. There was always a good Indian that someone knew. And I thought that was funny because that's how he thought of it. Somebody knew a good Indian. Otherwise, they were all roaming around drunk. That's the way their neighbors thought of him. Anything else?
No.
How about this very funny scene when Barnes, remember he's the boxing coach, he's a white guy, and he comes to Patrice's house and he says he's obviously very interested in Patrice, and Jeanette, the mother, is sitting there, and she says, listen, you know, give it up. I'm telling you, Pixie does not like you, Patrice does not like you. And he says, well, why do you say that? Why not? And she says, well, because you smell bad. And later she tells her son what he said, Pokey. And Pokey says, what? What did you tell him that for? He probably thinks we smell bad. And she says, no, I'm sure he doesn't. It's just that he really does smell bad. So in other words, you see that they really saw a difference between being Indian and being white. Any other thoughts on that?
Barbara had agreed with you. It's exactly what she wrote. That the Indians thought the whites smelled bad and vice versa.
Right. And of course, Barnes, the coach, the boxing coach, he had this image. Why did he like Patrice? He had this image of what a maiden, an Indian maiden, should look like from the carton of a dairy package. Remember that? How the Indians were, you know, they used that on the dairy cartons, and that was the image he had. So he was trying to pursue her as a result of that fantasy. Anything else? Any other comments? Okay. I want to just say to you that what was interesting to me was Thomas at one point says, you know, some people might think that this doesn't sound bad, that they're going to make us like regular Americans. There won't be any difference between us. And Thomas's answer to that is, closing in on 5 centuries, holding out through every kind of business you folks could throw our way. We held out because we just can't turn into regular Americans. We can look like it sometimes, act like it sometimes, but we are not. We are Indians. Any other comments that you want to make about this? Okay, so this is your opportunity to talk to me a little bit about what you thought about the book, anything you wanted to bring up. Any comments?
I'm waiting to see if anybody writes anything.
Anybody have anything to say? Well, while we're waiting for your comments, I want to tell you something really interesting, because the New York Times book review that I read made a little mention of something that I went ahead and looked at. According to the New York Times, there is a question of termination that has still come up. In June of this year, a federal judge ruled in favor of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe in Massachusetts because they are trying to maintain control of 321 acres of reservation land. They claim to be the tribe who welcomed pilgrims to these shores and invented Thanksgiving. They say that these are our lands, these are the lands of our ancestors, and these will be the lands of our grandchildren. Of course, what I thought was interesting as I read further about this, it seems that there's a very modern dilemma to this, because the land that they want to hold on to, the reason they're holding on to it also is they are right now in the works of trying to build a $1 billion casino on land. So right now, you know, the question is, it's a modern dilemma, because the fate of the tribe's land and trust could have a significant impact on the state's commercial casino industry. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing to add here.
You have a couple of comments, Lynda. One was from Christine, and she asked, how could we be so cruel? And Jackie said, I struggled and didn't care for it. While there were moments of brilliant writing, there were so many times of nonstop fluff. I liked it and was so much more interested in the author's notes at the end. And Leslie wrote, there's a tremendous analogy, what is it called? Analogy to the Black Lives Matter issue and protests and the subject of this book.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and we had both Arlette and Arlene are looking forward to reading the book, and they're thanking you for a great discussion.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Well, it's always hard. I try to give you enough of a summary that those of you that haven't read the book will be enticed to do so. And those of you that have read the book and perhaps forgot some of it, I'm happy to go ahead and refresh your memories. But I think it's an interesting book because I think it has a lot of message to it about history and also about the future. I think that the author at the end of the book, she leaves us in the afterword, and I thought this was a very important takeaway message. And it's a very poignant line that she says. She says, lastly, if you should ever doubt that a series of dry words in a government document can shatter spirits and demolish lives, let this book erase that doubt. Conversely, if you should ever be of the conviction that we are powerless to change those dry words, let this book give you heart. In all of her interviews online, she says that these words are as meaningful for all of us today as they ever were. I hope you enjoyed the book. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. And it was great to see all of you. And I look forward to seeing you all next month.
Thank you, Lynda.
Thank you.
And one thing, just to remind everybody, so the book for next month is Olive Again by Elizabeth Strout. But we realized, as I said, October 20th, that actually we may need to change the date. So please look out for that. But on October 20th, we are hosting, it is our Book Fest day. It is our day of fiction, and we are having 8 authors.
Wow.
And it'll be, so it'll be a wonderful opportunity. You can come, you can go, whatever, but it'll all be Zoom. And there's 8 different authors, including a local boy, David Hopin, who wrote The Orchard, and he is from Hollywood. So that's kind of exciting for us that he's going to be part of that day. But we have a lot of wonderful authors that day. So that will be going on October 20th, and we will be sending out the information about the exact date for this once I talk to Lynda after this and figure out the date.
That's if we have to change the date, that's a very good reason to do so. It sounds like a fabulous day.
Exactly. It's going to be a fabulous day. So thank you all for coming.
See you next
Thank
time.
you. Thank you, Lynda.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Linda.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Miss
Thank
you guys.
Bye-bye. Happy New Year. Happy
Yes, Happy New Year. Yes.
Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you again. It was great.
Good.
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you next month. Bye, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.